Hi, my name's Claire Halberg, and if you've ever felt like the family outcast, you're not alone. A few months ago, I got invited to my cousin's wedding. I almost didn't go. I knew exactly what would happen: whispers, fake smiles, the usual seat by the bathroom. But I went anyway. And when my husband showed up, everything changed. The envelope was ivory, elegant, and made my stomach turn. It sat in the center of my small kitchen table, practically gleaming under the overhead light, as if it were proud of itself. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I made tea, oversteeped it, then poured it down the drain. The envelope waited. I walked to the living room window, stared out at the rain-slick streets of Portland, then returned to the kitchen like a woman approaching her own sentencing. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Valerie's swooping cursive, overly flourished as if that could mask the blade tucked underneath. The return address. Her estate in Lake Oswego. Of course. I slid my finger under the seal, careful not to tear the paper. A soft card slid out, thick and embossed. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Brielle Monroe and Hayden Sawyer. Gold foil, script font, faux grandeur. And then I saw it, tucked in with the invitation, a folded note with Valerie's unmistakable tone. Dear Claire, we hope you'll attend. It's been so long. It would mean a lot to Brielle. The whole family is excited to reconnect. Don't worry. No pressure to make a speech or anything. Just come as you are. We'll save you a quiet spot. Valerie. The smiley face was the final insult. I exhaled sharply, more out of habit than emotion. Reconnect, she said, as if the last time they saw me hadn't involved whispered judgments. A wine glass spilled suspiciously close to my lap, and someone, probably Greg, loudly referring to me as that spinster cousin who reads too much. The phone rang. I didn't need to check the screen. I answered anyway. Hi, Mom. Claire, did you get the invitation? I did. A pause. I hope you'll consider coming, Charlotte said, her voice careful, brittle. It's just one day. You don't need to make it a statement. I'm not making anything a statement, Mom. It's a wedding, not a tribunal. Well, she said, that single syllable doing a lot of emotional labor. Families show up for each other. I could almost hear her nails clicking against the countertop. I waited. She didn't fill the silence. I'll think about it, I said at last. Just don't wait too long. Valerie needs to finalize seating. Of course she does. When we hung up, I stared at the RSVP card. There were two boxes. Will attend and regretfully decline. No third option. Emotionally allergic to false pleasantries. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Ethan. I think I'll go. For closure, not reunion. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then came his reply. You won't be alone. Not truly. I stared at the words longer than I expected. Not truly? What did that mean? I started to reply but didn't. He'd probably explain it later. Or not. I set the phone down and opened the suitcase I hadn't used since the Denver conference a year ago. I folded a navy dress, modest but sharp, and packed flats, not heels. They always looked for reasons to call me frumpy. Let them. Toiletries, charger, a paperback I'd already read twice. I zipped the bag shut with a quiet finality. This wasn't about Brielle. It wasn't even about Valerie. It was about walking back into a room that had always made me feel smaller, and not shrinking this time. It's just one wedding. I've survived worse. I arrived early. It didn't matter. They still sat me next to the emergency exit. The room smelled of lemon polish and manufactured grace, white tablecloths, golden flatware, and a floral arrangement so tall it practically blocked the view of the opposite guests. The Monroe family had spared no expense. It was California in March, sunny and pretentious. And here I was, perched near a swinging door labeled Staff Only. I stood still for a few seconds, trying not to look like I was standing still. Then I felt a cold kiss of air from behind as the door swung open and a waiter passed me, balancing a tray of stuffed figs. I didn't belong here. Not because I wasn't family, but because this wasn't family. Not the kind that made room for you. A sharp voice called my name. Claire, you made it. Valerie, in a coral sheath dress and enough pearls to shame the sea, floated toward me with a smile too wide to mean anything real. Her cheek brushed mine, faintly cool and scented like orchid-scented lotion and superiority. We weren't sure you'd come. So glad you did, she said, her eyes already scanning the room for more important people. Before I could answer, she was guiding me through the crowded room. We have your spot ready. Over here. I followed her past a table marked bridal party, then past one marked family. We kept walking. When she stopped, it was at a table set for 6, wedged between the bar and the swinging kitchen door. One chair was partially blocked by a pillar. Is this? I began. Valerie gave a little wave. Cozy, right? Close to the buffet. I looked at the name cards. Mine was the only one without a last name. Just Claire. Like a barista's guess, not a family member. I nodded slowly. Charming. A woman I didn't recognize was seated at the next table. She leaned over, squinting. Sorry, are you with catering? No, I said. Just related to the bride. Her eyebrows lifted in apology. Or was it surprise? I didn't wait to clarify. I sat down and took a long sip from the water glass in front of me. It tasted of lemon and restraint. From my vantage point, I could see Brielle fluttering about in the center of the room like a monarch butterfly. Pastel dress, glowing skin, confident smile. She laughed with someone in a navy suit, probably Hayden, and paused only to dab delicately at her lipstick. When she finally saw me, she approached with the air of someone ticking off a task. Claire, she sang. Wow, you came. I stood because I'd been raised to do that, even when not acknowledged properly. Of course. She did a quick once-over. You look comfortable. I nodded. And still single? She asked, her tone airy. I blinked. Yes. She didn't wait for more. Well, the signature cocktails are great. Try the elderflower spritz. Then she disappeared, swallowed by a sea of sequins and people who seemed to find her fascinating. I sat again, letting the sounds wash over me, cutlery clinking, soft jazz, murmurs that sounded rehearsed. Someone laughed in the corner, a little too loudly. A man in his 50s stumbled toward the bar, slurring something about champagne expectations. I heard my name again, soft, unfamiliar. A younger cousin, maybe. Isn't that the librarian cousin? Or wait, what's her job again? I think she writes blogs or something. Someone whispered back. Lives in Portland. Another voice. Did she come alone? They didn't say it maliciously. Just absently. Like I was wallpaper. When the appetizers arrived, I took a single bite of the endive and pear tartlet and put the rest aside. Across the room, Valerie raised a glass for a toast and gave a speech that included the words unity, legacy, and perfect union. I stopped listening after legacy. Then, for just a second, Brielle looked my way. It wasn't a long look, just a flicker. But in that brief moment, her expression cracked, and I saw something raw underneath. Not pity, not contempt. Something colder, a flicker of smugness. She saw me. And in her eyes, I was still the girl from the family's edge, the footnote, the weird one. And that's when I understood. They hadn't changed. Not really. Not in the ways that mattered. I picked up my phone, stared at the message screen. My fingers hovered over the keys, then typed without hesitation. They haven't changed. I almost turned around. When everyone laughs and you don't know why, you realize you were never in the joke, only in the punchline. The room had grown warmer as the evening wore on, not in temperature, but in texture. The heat of exclusion, the suffocating warmth of being surrounded yet untouched. The chandelier light bounced off wine glasses and sequins, painting everyone in hues of opulence and comfort. I sat, spine straight, smile polite, trying not to seem like I was trying. At our table, the conversation had turned to job promotions and real estate. A woman in a silk dress was describing her third rental property in Sausalito. Another chimed in about switching their youngest into a private Montessori. Everyone nodded like this was universally relevant. I reached for my glass of wine, half empty and warmer than I liked. Then it came. "So Claire," a voice piped up, female, curious, performative. "What is it you do these days?" Before I could respond, Valerie answered. "She does something remote, some writing thing. I think it gives her a lot of time off." Her tone was syrupy with that sheen of innocence that always cut deeper than cruelty. The table chuckled politely. The woman nodded as if that made sense. Something vague, nothing consequential. A hobby passed off as a profession. I gave a small smile and sipped my wine. There was no point correcting her. The truth wouldn't stick. It never had. Someone else murmured, "I didn't think she'd actually show. Thought maybe the whole Hallberg side would just skip it." A laugh followed, light and oblivious. "Probably wanted to save face," another voice added. "For the family." I held my expression steady. Just enough muscle tension to imply serenity. Not enough to show how my nails were digging gently into my palm beneath the tablecloth. My food was untouched, cooling elegantly on the plate. I pushed a piece of asparagus aside, carving silent tracks into the mashed potatoes. Conversations swirled around me, rich with familiarity I didn't possess. Even their laughter felt choreographed, built on shared jokes, unspoken memories, knowing glances. I didn't know the script. I never had. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored paneling behind the bar. The dress I'd chosen, the navy one, sharp and quiet, looked too stark in this soft-lit room. My posture was too rigid. Even my smile felt out of place, like it had been borrowed from someone else. A memory flickered. My 13th birthday. The backyard. Valerie handing me a wrapped dictionary, then turning to a group of relatives and saying, "Well, she's a bright one. Not much else going on, but she'll get scholarships." The laugh that followed had stayed with me longer than the gift. A server passed by with a tray of champagne flutes. I caught one without thinking, letting the bubbles hit my tongue, trying to erase the aftertaste of the moment. The hum of the evening grew heavier. Laughter peaked at something I didn't hear. Someone clinked a glass with a fork, prompting a toast. I clapped, not sure for what. Suddenly, I needed air. I stood, murmured something about a call, and slipped away. Through the glass doors, down 2 steps, onto the patio. The night was cool, blessedly still. I leaned against the railing and inhaled deeply. The garden was trimmed within an inch of its life, the hedges symmetrical, the path lined with tea lights. It was beautiful and sterile. I looked at my reflection in the dark window pane. "Maybe I don't belong here," I whispered. "Maybe I never did." The phone in my clutch vibrated. I pulled it out. One message lit the screen. "Ethan, do you want me there?" I stared at the words for a long time. Then I typed, "Yes." I texted one word, "Yes." And the air changed. It wasn't visible, not exactly, but something shifted, like the subtle drop in pressure before a storm. I stood at the edge of the garden, watching the final touches fall into place. Rows of white chairs had been arranged with militant precision. Pale pink roses framed the altar. A string quartet rehearsed scales beneath a lattice of twinkling bulbs. Everything gleamed. I walked deliberately, heels clicking softly against the stone path. The dress I wore was deep sapphire, tailored to skim rather than cling. Understated but impossible to ignore. Not loud, just undeniable. As I neared the seated guests, heads turned. Not many. Just a few. Enough to register. Enough to know I'd been noticed. Charlotte spotted me first. Her lips pursed before she even opened her mouth. "Claire, you look formal." I let that float, unsnagged. From her left, Valerie emerged like a scent you couldn't quite name but couldn't forget. "Isn't that shade usually reserved for the bridal party?" she asked, voice low, saccharine. "I thought pastels were the theme." I met her gaze. "I'm not in the theme." Charlotte's jaw tightened. "Claire, don't make this a thing." "I'm not," I said, adjusting the strap of my clutch. "I'm just standing in the spot assigned to me." Valerie blinked, as if uncertain whether that was an act of defiance or just a fact. I found my place at the edge of the front row. Not in the center. Not near the bride's family. But not hidden either. I stood instead of sitting, eyes scanning the scene. Not looking for him. Not yet. Just breathing. From the opposite aisle, Dee Lorraine gave me a small nod. Neutral. Observing. She was always good at watching before choosing sides. "Seats will fill up quickly," she said gently. "You sure you want to stand?" "I'm exactly where I need to be," I replied. Inside the tented walkway, movement stirred. Murmurs began, cascading down rows like falling dominoes. The bridal procession was assembling. Brielle stepped into view, flanked by her bridesmaids in soft lavender. Her veil trailed behind like spun glass. Applause rose, timed and obligatory. Phones lifted. But then it happened. A ripple of silence. It started somewhere near the back. A hush, like breath being drawn in and held. Faces turned. Not forward, but behind. Toward the path. Toward the man now stepping onto the stone. He moved slowly, purposefully. In a charcoal suit that cut clean against the backdrop of pale colors. He wore no tie. Just crisp lines and quiet confidence. People whispered. Someone gasped. Even Valerie's hand faltered mid-adjustment of her bracelet. I didn't turn. Didn't need to. I just smiled. Small, steady, and said the only words that mattered. "He's here." No microphone. No announcement. Just him walking to me. And their silence said everything. The reception had begun to unravel in its usual glitter. Champagne flutes chiming, a jazz trio filling the garden with mellow notes, and guests weaving between tall heaters and overfilled tables. It was the kind of evening where everyone pretended to be more relaxed than they were. The kind of evening where everything was about appearances, until it wasn't. He appeared without fanfare, as if he'd always been part of the scene. No one saw where he came from, only that one moment he wasn't there, and the next, he was. Ethan walked with steady steps, cutting through the gold light like a whispered truth. There was no hesitation, no scanning the crowd. He walked straight toward me, and when he reached me, he took my hand. Not dramatically, not performatively, just fingers sliding into mine like they'd always belonged there. A hush rippled through the nearby tables. Forks paused midair. Conversations broke in half. All eyes pivoted. I didn't look at them. I looked at Ethan. In that moment, something old inside me relaxed. Something that had always braced for judgment, for whispers behind linen napkins, for the barely masked surprise that someone like me could ever be seen. A voice nearby, low but too loud to be accidental. "Wait, is that Ethan Walsh from Civic Code?" Another followed, The Ethan Walsh? The tech guy who turned down a White House advisory seat? Someone started tapping frantically on their phone. Valerie recovered first. Of course she did. She approached with a tilt of the head and that practiced smile reserved for networking. Claire, dear, you really do keep secrets. Imagine our surprise. Ethan turned to her slowly. We don't hide, he said, voice even. We just don't perform. Valerie blinked, the corners of her mouth twitching before she retreated behind her glass. From across the tent I saw Brielle watching, her expression unreadable. Then, as our eyes met, she quickly looked away. Down at her feet, at her drink, anywhere but at me. Ethan leaned slightly toward me. You okay? I nodded, surprised at how much I meant it. A server passed by with a tray of flutes. Ethan took one, not for himself, but to raise. He didn't climb a podium, didn't tap a glass. He just spoke. And somehow everyone heard. I'm proud of Claire, he said, his voice carrying not through volume, but certainty. Not for what she endured, but for what she never let define her. A pause, just long enough for it to sink. Someone clapped, a few others followed. The applause was hesitant, then polite. But no one laughed. No one joked. Because they saw it now, the recalibration of the room, the reordering. Valerie's hand tightened around her stemmed glass. Her voice, barely audible, hissed between clenched teeth. This changes nothing. But Brielle didn't echo her. Brielle just looked over, and for the first time that day, she lowered her eyes. ChatGPT John Noy. He toasted to family unity, while holding the knife that had sliced me out of it. The laughter in the reception room had shifted. Less organic now, more cautious. Conversations danced nervously around Ethan's presence, glancing off him like pebbles against glass. Valerie, of course, was the first to recalibrate, always quick to sense where the power pooled, like a social heat-seeking missile. She took Ethan's arm lightly, leading him toward the front of the room with a bright hostess smile. We'd love a few words, she purred. You know, about success, perseverance, how you got where you are. It'd be such an inspiration to the young people. I didn't move from my seat. No one had asked me to speak. No one had even asked how I was enjoying the evening. I was still a guest at my own humiliation, just better dressed this time. Ethan glanced back at me. I gave him the smallest nod. He knew exactly what this was, but he wasn't afraid of giving them just enough rope. He stood at the center of the room, tall and calm, as though he'd been born for spotlights. His voice carried without effort. I was asked to say something about success, he began. But success, at least in my case, came from knowing who to stop listening to. That earned a few tight laughs. Valerie's face twitched before returning to its lacquered serenity. When you build something from scratch, people call it lucky. When you fail, they say they saw it coming. And when you succeed, they ask to be part of it, even if they weren't there for the climb. More silence. True unity, he added, lifting his glass, isn't about shared blood or photo ops. It's about who shows up when there's nothing to gain. Glasses clinked slowly. Not with warmth, but with obligation. I sipped my drink, then set it aside, the bitterness too honest. Moments later, a man in his 50s leaned toward Ethan, eyes flicking to me. Your +1's lovely. New relationship? He wasn't malicious, just careless. I opened my mouth, but Ethan beat me to it. She's my wife, he said, voice cool. We've been married 6 years. The man blinked, stumbled. Oh, well, sorry, I didn't realize. No need, Ethan replied smoothly. You didn't ask. The words settled over the room like dust on glass. From somewhere near the fireplace, Brielle watched, expression brittle. But she didn't move, just clutched her flute a little tighter. A pause. Then Ethan turned to me, voice low, measured. Are we staying? I looked around. The room had become louder again, picking up energy, conversation trying to resume. But something in the air had warped. My chair still felt separate, like I was sitting behind an invisible barrier, watching them perform civility. I stood. Not another minute. The scrape of my chair echoed louder than expected. Heads turned, a few hands froze mid-toast. I picked up my clutch and walked toward the door, each step light but certain. This wasn't a retreat. It was a reclamation. Then, behind me, Valerie's voice rang out. Too loud, too thin. Claire, don't be dramatic. Ethan turned, calm and clear. No, he said. She's finally being seen. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I walked. And they had to watch me go. The gravel crunched beneath our feet, each step measured, deliberate. Behind us, the wedding murmured back to life, a stuttering engine trying to regain momentum. The string quartet picked up again, notes drifting on the breeze like distant regrets. I didn't turn around. Lights from the reception flickered through the garden's ivy-covered archways. A few shadows moved behind the glass. Observers, spectators, maybe even skeptics. But none of them followed, not even Charlotte, especially not Charlotte. My heels sank slightly into the gravel with each step. I liked the resistance. It felt like the earth reminding me I was still here, still grounded. Ethan walked beside me in silence, his presence like an anchor in the dark. Finally, he said, "We could have stayed. You know that, right?" That room was turning. I glanced at him. Turning toward what? Their approval? He shrugged gently. Toward acknowledgement, maybe respect. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Why fight for a seat at a table I don't want to sit at anymore? He didn't argue. Instead, he reached out and took my hand, just like he had earlier. But this time, there was no audience, no statement, just the truth of it. We walked past the last hedgerow lining the driveway. The air was cooler here, the night deeper. Do you remember your 18th birthday? I asked suddenly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. I wasn't there for it. Exactly, I said. It was at Valerie's house. A surprise party, she said. I showed up 15 minutes late, traffic. The front door was locked. They'd started without me. Someone thought it would be funny to make me climb through the back window. Valerie laughed the loudest. He didn't respond, just let the silence hold space for it. I told myself it didn't matter, I continued. That it was just a joke. But I remember brushing dirt off my dress while everyone else smiled for the camera. I stood behind a potted plant in that group photo. Ethan squeezed my hand. You remember every frame. Because for years I thought if I just did enough, endured enough, they'd finally let me in the front door. He stopped walking, turning to face me. And now? I met his gaze. Now I realize I was always enough. They just needed me small. A breeze stirred the trees above us. Somewhere, a wind chime clinked softly, like a fragile applause from the universe. Ethan tilted his head. So what's next? I didn't hesitate. We build something else, I said. A place where no one gets asked to leave themselves behind to belong. He smiled. Not the polite smile he gave strangers, but the rare one that dimpled his left cheek and softened everything around him. That's a place I want to live in. I looked ahead. The valet's post glowed in the distance. Our car waited at the curb. But before we reached it, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Brielle, can we talk? Just us? She wanted to talk, as if years of silence could be reset in one message. The cafe was quiet in that early Sunday morning way, still stretching, still half asleep. The kind of place where even the spoons clinking against ceramic seemed hesitant to break the peace. Outside, Fog hugged the window panes. Inside, the scent of roasted beans mingled with something more tentative: expectation. Brielle was already there when I arrived. She sat near the window, stirring a cup of something she clearly wasn't drinking. Her hands fidgeted with the napkin in her lap, folding and unfolding it like an origami apology. "Thanks for coming," she said, eyes flicking up. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't either," I said, sitting down. Silence, awkward and lingering, took the third seat at our table. She started, then stopped. Tried again. "Thanks for not making a scene last night." "You could've." I tilted my head. "You think that's what strength looks like? Not throwing a tantrum?" Brielle flushed, color rising high on her cheekbones. "I didn't mean it like that." I nodded slowly. "I didn't need to make a scene. I needed to be seen. There's a difference." She glanced away toward the street. "It's not like we meant to exclude you. It just happened. You always seemed so removed, like you didn't want to be part of things." I let that sit for a beat. "I was silent," I said. "Not invisible. There's a difference there, too." Brielle took a breath, then looked at me, this time more directly. "I used to think you didn't care. About family. About me. You were always so smart, so poised. People compared us. Constantly. Do you know how that felt?" My brows lifted. "You think I enjoyed being the family's favorite cautionary tale? Too serious, too cold, too bookish to ever be loved properly. Ring any bells?" Her mouth opened, closed. "I felt like I could never measure up," she said quietly. "So I learned to lower the bar, drag others down to meet it. It wasn't personal." "It always is," I replied. "You say you felt small. So instead of growing, you shrank the room." Her fingers tightened around her cup. "You're not the only one who got hurt." "No," I agreed. "But I'm the only one who kept being asked to bleed quietly." Brielle looked down. Her voice was small now, younger. "I didn't know how to stop it." "That's the thing," I said, standing. "You didn't even try." She blinked up at me. "So that's it? You just walk away from the family?" "I walk away from letting them define me. That's not the same thing." She exhaled, uncertain. "Claire, what do you do with all of it then? All the words they never listened to? All the moments they erased?" I looked at her fully, steady. "I turn them into something they can't ignore. Some truths aren't shouted. They're published." It started with a blank page at 1:43 a.m. The apartment was still. Ethan had gone to bed 2 hours earlier after pressing a kiss to the top of my head and whispering, "Don't stay up too late." But I couldn't sleep, not with the weight of unsaid things swelling behind my ribs. The cursor blinked, taunting. For a long time, I stared back. Then I typed the title, "For the Ones Who Sat at the Wrong Table," and the words followed like breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for decades. I wrote about the wedding, yes, but not the flowers or the food or the silence when Ethan arrived. I wrote about smaller moments. Being 12 and hearing my name mispronounced deliberately at a family picnic. Being 26 and not getting a congratulatory call when I published my first journal article. Being 35 and realizing absence wasn't just a condition, it was a design. I wrote about invisibility and the ache of pretending it didn't hurt. And then I wrote about walking out. Not because I was bitter, but because I was finally full. By 3:11 a.m., I had 2,300 words. Raw, unpolished, but true. I padded quietly into the bedroom. Ethan stirred when the mattress dipped. "You okay?" he mumbled. "I wrote something," I said. "Can I read it to you?" He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Always." I read aloud, hesitant at first, then more certain as his expression shifted from sleepy curiosity to something quieter, heavier. When I reached the final paragraph, he was silent for a long moment. Then, Claire, you just wrote what half the world feels but never says. I looked down, embarrassed by how much his reaction mattered. Is it too much? It's not enough, he said. They need this. The next morning, I submitted it to a site I'd followed for years but never dared to contact. Hervoice.org. Their tagline, stories that didn't ask for permission. I hit send and closed the laptop, convinced I'd never hear back. 2 days later, they emailed. Your piece will be our Saturday feature. We've titled the section, The Ones Who Left the Room. Thank you for giving language to so many unnamed exits. The article went live at 9 a.m. By noon, it had 8,000 views. By sunset, 37,000. By midnight, 112,000. Comments poured in. Women, men, teenagers. Some left only a line. This was me. Others wrote paragraphs, detailing dinners where they were forgotten, achievements dismissed, seats never offered. One message stopped me cold. I was always called the difficult one. I thought something was wrong with me. But your words made me realize I was just surrounded by people who refused to see me. Thank you for naming that pain. I reread it 3 times, heart pounding. Then, at 2:04 a.m., another notification. A new comment. This one anonymous, but the phrasing familiar. It's easy to tell stories when you're the hero in them. I stared at the screen. Even behind the mask, I knew the voice. Valerie. I expected backlash. I didn't expect the flood of Me Too. It began with one comment, then another, then 100. After my post went live, I shut my laptop and walked away, half preparing myself for silence, half bracing for attack. I didn't expect the silence to break so quickly, or so completely. Within 12 hours, my inbox swelled with notifications, hundreds of shares, dozens of emails, stories pouring in from women who had also been sat at the wrong table, called the wrong names, told they were too much or not enough. Some had been cut out for marrying the wrong person, some for speaking too boldly, some simply for growing into someone their families didn't expect or approve of. And scattered among them were 2 haunting words. Me too. Ethan sat beside me in the kitchen as I read the messages aloud, one by one. His hand rested on mine the entire time, grounding me. I didn't know how to respond to so much raw truth arriving all at once. It was like being handed shards of broken mirrors, everyone reflecting some version of my own past. I remembered something I once told him, back when I believed it. Silence is armor. But now I realized it had also been my cage. By the end of the week, Her Voice, the nonprofit media platform that featured my piece, reached out. They were hosting a roundtable for contributors whose stories had stirred conversation. Would I be willing to join? I hesitated. Do you want to? Ethan asked me quietly that night. You don't have to. I looked out the window. The moonlight pooled on our kitchen counter like another kind of spotlight. I don't want to hide, I said. Not anymore. So that's how I found myself sitting in a warm, light-filled room with 7 other women, some younger, some older, none strangers anymore. The founder of Her Voice, a kind-eyed woman named Aisha, greeted me with a hug that felt more like a welcome than anything I'd ever received at family gatherings. You wrote what people have been swallowing for decades, she said, and now they're ready to speak. Each woman took a turn. One had been written out of her father's will because she came out. Another hadn't been invited to her sister's baby shower for asking too many negative questions about postpartum depression. All of them had learned the same lesson in different languages. Silence is the price of belonging. When it was my turn, I spoke slowly, clearly. I didn't write my story for revenge, I said. or to be pitied, or even to be applauded. A young woman across from me raised her hand. What if your family reads it? What if they reach out? Apologize? I held her gaze. I didn't write it so they would apologize. I wrote it so no one would have to apologize for living like I did. The room went still. A silence I could live inside. Later that day, a regional news station emailed me. They'd seen the article, heard the noise, and wanted me on their evening segment, part of a week-long focus on digital storytelling and marginalized voices. This time, I didn't hesitate. The interview aired on a Thursday. I wore navy blue, kept my tone measured. The anchor asked about shame, about healing, about the line between private and public pain. Is there a moment when you knew your silence had become too heavy to carry? I thought of my cousin's wedding, the way my chair had been placed near the exit, the look in Valerie's eyes when Ethan took my hand. Yes, I answered. It was the moment I realized I wasn't invisible. I was being erased, and I decided I wouldn't let that happen quietly. When the segment ended, I turned off the TV. Ethan reached over and squeezed my hand. That was all you, he whispered. No edits, no pretense. I nodded. The quiet inside me didn't feel like suppression anymore. It felt like space. Room for more voices to enter. That night, as I folded laundry on the couch, my phone buzzed. A message. Unfamiliar number, but the name lit up my spine like a cold wind. Valerie. Just 2 sentences. I read everything. You won. But do you know what you've done to the rest of us? She asked if I'd forgive her. I said I'd think about it. And meant it. The cafe was quiet, tucked along the riverbank like a secret too soft to shout. The kind of place where everything felt lighter. Conversation, footsteps, guilt. I chose a table by the window and ordered a black coffee, letting the steam rise in silence. Brielle arrived 12 minutes late. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, and she wore a jacket too formal for the setting, like she was dressing for confession. She spotted me, hesitated, then walked over. Hi, she said, settling into the seat across from me. I nodded. You found the place. I almost didn't come, she admitted, eyes darting to the floor. I wasn't sure you'd still want to talk. I said I would, I replied, tone even. That hasn't changed. The waiter came and went. She ordered a chamomile tea she barely touched. The air between us held every word we hadn't said in years. I've been reading what people wrote to you, she started. All those comments, the shares, the talk shows. You really reached people. I didn't answer. She exhaled. The night of the wedding, when you walked out, I wasn't sad. I was jealous. You looked like someone who didn't care what any of us thought. I didn't, I said. Brielle laughed, short and breathless. Yeah, that was obvious. I watched her fidget with her teaspoon. Jealousy is a feeling, I said quietly. Betrayal is a decision. Her hands froze. The silver spoon clinked softly against the ceramic. I know, she whispered. I've been thinking about everything. About the way I used to talk about you. Or not talk. Just pretend you weren't there. It was easier. For who? I asked. For me? She said, the words catching. It was easier to ignore you than to face myself. I nodded slowly. I figured. Brielle looked up. If I wanted to make it right, would you give me a chance? I sipped my coffee before answering. Make what right, exactly? I don't know, she admitted. Maybe I can't. But I thought maybe, if I asked, maybe you'd tell me how. I looked at her. Not as the cousin who used to sneer behind her glass of champagne, not as the girl who'd once locked a younger me outside at a family reunion, but as a woman now trying to face the wreckage she'd helped build. Forgiveness, I said, doesn't mean we go back to how things were. It means you no longer get to shape how I remember them. She blinked, slowly, the impact of those words sinking in. I spent years doubting my memory, I continued, thinking I was too sensitive, too quiet, too cold. Because that's how you all chose to see me. But I'm done carrying your version of me. Brielle was silent, her hands folded in her lap now, as if in prayer. I thought about what it would look like to forgive you, I added, and I realized I don't have to let you back in to let go. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was heavy, honest. She finally looked up. If someday I step far enough back to see you more clearly, would you ever look over your shoulder? I paused. That depends, I said. Are you stepping back to give me space, or hoping I invite you closer? Brielle smiled faintly, sad, maybe a little free. I don't know yet. I finished the last sip of my coffee. It had gone cold. We didn't hug when we parted. We didn't make promises. But when she turned away and I didn't watch her go, I realized something else. I wasn't protecting myself anymore. I was choosing myself. And that felt like the most radical form of forgiveness I'd ever known. I used to believe silence made me strong. Now I know. Voice does. The ballroom of the Civic Center had been transformed. Rows of seats, soft lighting, a backdrop that read, her voice in sweeping lavender script. But all I could see was the single microphone standing at center stage, waiting. I stood just behind the curtain, fingers loosely laced together, the pulse in my wrist steady, but alert. Ethan leaned in, his voice low. They're not afraid of your words. They're afraid you'll be heard. I know, I said. That's why I'm going to speak. The MC introduced me with a brief biography. My name, my blog, and the phrase, Claire Hallberg, writer, speaker, advocate. I stepped out. Applause greeted me. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I stepped into the light and let the silence fall again. When I was 11, I began. I turned the corner into the dining room, wearing a paper crown I made myself, and found my birthday cake half eaten. No candles, no song. No one noticed I'd come in. The room stilled. I stood in that doorway for what felt like an hour, and then I turned around and told myself, maybe next year. Maybe then I'd matter. I paused, scanning the crowd. Somewhere near the back, I caught the profile of my mother, Charlotte. Rigid posture, folded arms. Valerie sat beside her, one leg crossed over the other, eyes narrowed. I used to think being invisible made me safe, that if I didn't speak, I couldn't be misquoted, couldn't be mocked. I thought silence was my armor. I let that sit. But silence, I said, can also be a cell. People leaned forward, breath caught. For 30 years, I continued, I played the family extra. The placeholder in group photos, the unremarkable cousin. I was told I was too serious, too sensitive, too quiet. I scanned again. Charlotte had shifted. Valerie whispered something to her. Eventually, I believed them. I became what they saw. I edited myself down to fit their story. I inhaled deeply, centering. But something changed. Not in them. In me. I looked out, not to find anyone, but to anchor myself. One day, I realized the story wasn't theirs to own, and I didn't have to wait for them to rewrite it. I could pick up the pen. Applause bubbled. I held my hand up gently. Not yet. I write for the ones who never got a seat at the table, who smiled too politely when told they were forgettable, who turned their pain into silence because that was the only language they were allowed. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. Another, further back, let out a soft sob. I write because someone needs to say, you are not the background, you are not the footnote, you are not someone else's contrast color. I closed my eyes briefly. And I write because I needed to hear it too. More applause. Louder. Sustained. I opened my eyes and saw Valerie looking downward. Charlotte was gone. I used to be called the gray blur in every family photo, I said softly into the final hush. So I chose to paint my own portrait, out loud. And then, with deliberate weight, I chose to rewrite the supporting role they gave me, using my own voice. No narrator. No apology. The ovation was thunderous. I didn't bow. I didn't smile. I stepped back from the microphone, my chest full. Not with pride, but with something steadier. On the edge of the curtain, Ethan met me. His eyes said what words didn't need to. Behind me, they were still clapping. But what anchored me wasn't the crowd. It was the door at the back of the hall, swinging quietly as Charlotte slipped out, not waiting for the end. And that, more than anything I'd said on stage, told me I had been heard. She didn't say sorry. She said my name. That was more shocking. It was late afternoon when I saw her. Charlotte, my mother, sat on a weather-worn bench beneath a copper-leafed maple tree in Laurelhurst Park. She wore the same light gray windbreaker she always did, the collar flipped up like armor, her walking shoes planted stiffly beneath her like she wasn't sure whether to stand or stay. I'd received the message that morning. Meet me where we used to go feed the ducks. The ducks weren't there anymore. Maybe they'd learned not to come back where breadcrumbs tasted like mixed signals. I approached slowly, watching her fingers twist around the strap of her handbag over and over. She looked up only when I stood before her. Con, bai gyo noitiang roi ni. Her voice had that thin, polite tone she reserved for strangers or store clerks. I didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, I sat beside her. Not close, not far. Just enough distance for air and honesty. I watched the talk, she said, eyes fixed on a man walking a golden retriever across the path. You looked composed. Did you expect me not to be? No, she admitted. But part of me hoped you wouldn't show up, that you'd decide it wasn't worth it. I let that hang between us like wet laundry. She wasn't here to apologize. I could feel it in the way she kept her back too straight, like saying sorry might break her spine. I don't hate you, Claire, she said quietly, startling me with the sound of my name. Not my daughter, not Kambe Lapti. Just Claire. She didn't look at me when she said it, and that made it feel even more real. I never did, she continued. I just feared you'd end up like me, except better, smarter, louder, braver. And I didn't know how to love a version of myself I couldn't compete with. I closed my eyes. For years, I'd tried to decode her distance, rewire her silences into something maternal. But it had never occurred to me that her neglect came not from indifference, but from intimidation. I never needed you to be perfect, I said at last. I needed you to stop pretending I wasn't yours when I didn't fit your picture. She turned to me slowly. Her face, lined with age and something more private, softened. When you were little, she said, you asked me once if I liked that you were different. I remembered. I'd been 6, wearing mismatched socks and reading a dictionary on the porch. She'd told me, I like it better when you act normal. I didn't answer you properly, she said now. And by the time I wanted to, you stopped asking. I swallowed a sudden knot in my throat. There's this world you've built, she said, with your voice, your own weight. It scares me, but I want to learn to walk in it. With lighter feet, if you'd let me. My breath caught. This wasn't an apology. It was an offering, hesitant, raw, but real. I turned toward her. I haven't locked the door, I said, but you'll have to learn how to knock. She gave the faintest nod, unsure maybe how to take that. Maybe wondering how many knocks it might take before I opened it wider. We sat in silence after that. but not the kind that stings. It was the kind that listens. Above us, a single red leaf fell between our shoes. She didn't pick it up. Neither did I. I don't want to pass down heirlooms. I want to pass down freedom. The studio was small, no bigger than the kitchen in my childhood apartment, but it felt cathedral-like in its quiet purpose. The light was soft, bouncing off warm-toned walls, and the air hummed with a low anticipation. My hands rested on the table in front of me, palms open, fingers slightly curled, as if preparing to hold something invisible, but immense. This was our first live stream. Second Voice, a name Ethan had helped me choose one sleepless night, was no longer just a concept. It was real. A space. Digital. Yes, but solid in intention. For those whose stories had been shut down too early or never invited to begin. The camera light turned red. We were live. "Good evening," I began, voice steadier than I expected. "If you're watching this, maybe you've been where I've been, told to be quiet, told your version was too much or not enough. Tonight isn't about reliving pain, it's about reclaiming the room." The live chat blinked to life, a cascade of greetings, hearts, and 3 simple words I saw again and again. "I'm here too." Our first guest was Layla, a 22-year-old student who had been cut off by her parents after coming out. She wore a hoodie with thumb holes and smiled with eyes that flickered between hope and residual hurt. "I thought if I succeeded on their terms, they'd accept me again," she said. "But I realized I don't want conditional love. I want space to be whole." The comments exploded with solidarity. Ethan, standing behind the camera, met my gaze and gave a small, proud nod. Next was June, 60 years old, voice like gravel and grace. Her story unraveled slowly, how her sister had stopped speaking to her 30 years ago because June had refused to side with her in a family dispute. "I kept the silence like a trophy," June said, "as if it proved I wasn't needy. But silence didn't dignify me. It buried me." There was a beat of stillness after that, the kind that doesn't demand applause, only presence. Then it was my turn again. "I used to believe being invisible kept me safe," I said. "I thought if I didn't speak, no one could twist my words. But what they twisted was my absence. They shaped my silence into whatever story suited them." I looked straight into the lens. "They used to call me the quiet one, the difficult one, the disappointment. But today, I am not here to defend myself. I am here to declare I was never the problem. The problem was a house too small for my voice." The screen pulsed with reactions. Hearts, crying emojis, people typing, "Yes, this. This is me." I breathed in deeply. "I won't pass down heirlooms," I said, "but I will pass down the freedom to speak, to take up space, to tell your version before someone else does." That was our close. As the stream ended, the room stayed quiet. Ethan walked over and placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "You didn't just build a platform," he said. "You built a language." I nodded, eyes stinging, not from pain, but from recognition. Later that night, as I packed away my notes and slipped my laptop into its bag, a new email appeared in my inbox. The subject line was blank, but the sender was unmistakable. Valerie. Her message was short. "I will never apologize, but if the seat is still open, I'll come listen." I stared at it,